Good morning, everyone.
This meeting is now being recorded.
Thank you. Good morning, folks. Thanks for joining. Greetings from the Charter Review Committee to all of you who've joined today. This is our first of 3 sessions scheduled to share our proposed recommendations with you, and then answer any questions that you might have and gather any final input that you might be able to help us with as we complete our work over the next month. We'll start with a presentation that will last approximately 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for some dialogue at the end. During the presentation, all mics will be turned off. For those wishing to speak, you'll have an opportunity to do so at the end during the Q&A feedback session. So I suggest you may want to take notes. There are approximately 20, 23, 24 slides. So if something pops into your head that you want to ask at the end, you might want to note that down. I'm Ed Ivaldi, the chair of the Charter Review Committee. And joining me today to deliver this presentation will be Tom Golden. He's one of our committee members. And there may be another committee member joining. Steve Purcell said he might be able to join, but if not, it'll just be the 2 of us today. I see some familiar faces out there, so great. Thanks again for joining. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Good on my end, Ed.
Okay, great. All right. So as for the agenda, it's pretty simple. We'll share a little about where we've been over the last year. Hard to believe it's been a year already. And then we'll remind you of how we approached our work and then dive into the recommendations. To set the stage, I want to tell you up front that our presentation today does not include every single detailed recommendation. For that, you'll have to read the updated charter that is posted out on our website. Because of time, what we want to do today is highlight many of our key recommendations. And then to wrap up, we'll talk briefly about some options for rollout of these recommendations, as well as some next steps over the next month. As I said before, we'll then move at the very end to a time of feedback and listening from you on anything that you want to contribute. In terms of background, the committee was formed a year ago, May of 2020. The committee has pretty much stayed the same throughout the year, although we did have 1 resignation early on, but that was quickly filled by the town council, that opening. And so the 7 of us have been, as I said, pretty much active right from, I think, August right through to today. We've met at least twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month. With a total right now, I think, of actually it's 28 meetings. This slide is a little outdated, 28 meetings over the past year. The first 3 months focused on organizing ourselves, setting expectations, gathering and reviewing prior charter review data, doing some planning and establishing a schedule that would guide us on our efforts. From September through November, the committee focused on developing and distributing a citizen survey, an employee questionnaire. We also conducted 3 public forums to solicit additional feedback in the fall. For the final phase, which began this past December, we conducted an in-depth review of the charter, pretty much going line by line, discussing and voting on potential recommendations, as well as reconciling the feedback that we had received from both citizens and employees with the survey and the questionnaire that we had sent out earlier. In terms of scoping our efforts and trying not to reinvent the wheel, we made a decision early on that we would not start with a blank sheet of paper, but rather we'd try to utilize the prior work of the 2014 Charter Review and the 2017 Town Council Rules and Procedures Committees. This gave us a good baseline from which to start from, and it saved a lot of additional time and effort. We also realized that much of the original 2010 charter, which is what we're under right now, has served us well over the past decade. So we wanted to ensure that we kept what was working well, but focus on those areas of our government that could use some improvement. As already mentioned, getting input from the community and employees was key in helping us identify those potential areas for improvement. I wanted to show this slide just to give you a brief view of the online survey that we had conducted in the fall. There were 13 questions, and it was based on pretty much the former Charter Review Committee recommendations and important issues facing the town. The survey was open for 37 days, and we received a total of 114 responses. The data collected was analyzed by the committee and summarized for use in our deliberations. The goal was to try and address as much of the feedback as possible specifically related to the charter. As seen from this summary chart of key findings, although some of the feedback did not specifically relate to the charter, it certainly still has value in other areas of the government. Okay, so now we're going to begin to actually look at the recommendations, and we've broken the recommendations down into two categories. This slide will address sort of the general recommendations, which cover the whole charter. And then what we're going to do is take each article one by one, and we'll go through and talk about the key recommendations within each article that we're recommending. So I'm going to go over the general ones here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and Tom will walk through the slides for each specific article. So under the general recommendations, one of the things we obviously did was we went back and looked at all the definitions that were in the original charter, and we added some new definitions, as well as clarified ambiguity and improved the readability of some of the existing definitions. So the four that you see here are new ones that were added. These are things that were referenced in the charter that we felt needed to be defined up in the definitions section. MGL is Mass General Law, and so on. So these are pretty much the four new ones that we added. Another thing we did was we reviewed the whole charter for gender neutral language. We felt that we wanted to bring the charter up to date with the times and basically avoid any word choices that may be interpreted as biased, discriminatory, or demeaning. So the whole charter has been updated to reflect that. Another thing we did was we wanted to bring the charter up to date with its stated form of government. Section 1.1 of the charter says this: the Charter of Bridgewater shall constitutionally have a city form of government. Now what that basically means is that structurally we are actually a city, because that's the form of government that we have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to call ourselves outside the charter as a city. We can still keep the town signage if we want. We can still keep the appearance of being a town if we want, but we felt it was important to, at least from a charter perspective, make sure that the charter, since we do have a city form of government, reflected city references. So basically we went in and looked at every occurrence of the word town, and we changed those to city. So it would be city council, city, whatever it would be. Every reference to town has been changed to city. Another thing we did, we found that the Mass General Law references, the nomenclature used was not consistent throughout the charter. So we researched that a little bit and came up with what we thought was the right way to reference Mass General Law, and we used that consistently throughout the charter. Another thing we did was we wanted to initiate the use of hyperlinks. So any sort of reference material that's in the charter, we wanted to make sure that there was a hyperlink there that would direct any readers to that supporting document or reference material to make it easy for people to get access to that without having to go and do the research on their own. And then last but not least, believe it or not, there were still quite a number of grammatical errors in the charter from 10 years ago, or actually, 12 years ago now. So we corrected those errors and improved for readability. So these are, again, general recommendations that apply to the whole charter. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tom, who's going to walk through each article. Tom, you're on mute.
Trying to unmute there. So I'm going to start by saying if I start to talk too fast, I'm going to ask Ed to just tell me to slow down. The other two things I want to mention are, first, that a copy of this presentation is on the Charter Review's website, as well as the complete draft charter with all the changes. So what I'm going to talk about here isn't going to include everything. It's just going to include the high-level things. If you want additional detail, please go to our website. I'm going to start with Article 1. So the two things we did is we removed the definitions from Article 1 and placed them at the beginning of the charter, like Ed has already discussed. Other than that, there were no substantive changes, so meaning things other than like grammar and stuff like that were changed in Article 1. Ed, you can go to slide 2. So the Article 2, which is the legislative branch. Some key points were in 2.1b, we adjusted the language to clarify how vacancies were filled. Section 2.1c minimizes the lame duck period and changes from beginning on the second Monday following the election to the next business day following the election. So if it's a Saturday, it's a Monday. If it's Tuesday, it's a Wednesday, and so forth. 2.1d was edited for clarity and added the prohibition for state ethics law violations, itemized for each of them for improved readability, as the slide says, and we added one extra provision. 2.1e related to term limits. The two major changes included one for more contentious debates of the committee. The town councilor councilor term cannot exceed 4 elections to a city council, and the other related to prior service, either as a councilor position, does not limit eligibility. The committee opinions ranged from 4 term limits to no term limits. We had quite the lengthy debate about the term limit discussion, and if anybody wants more detail on it, I would implore you to go and watch that session, which is available on YouTube. Ed, you can go to the next one.
Yeah, Tom, can I just add something to this one? Because I just want to make sure people understand this. So as we all know, the charter had a loophole in it right now. Consecutive 12 years is the way it's stated. And what we did was we eliminated the time factor. So what it says now is basically a district or an at-large councilor can only be elected 4 times to that particular position. However, a district councilor, once they reach their 4 elections, could then, they're eligible to run for an at-large. And likewise, an at-large councilor, if they hit their 4 election term, could then run for a district councilor. So essentially now, instead of having just 4 terms, the councilors could potentially have 8 terms.
For a total of 24 years.
Right. Okay, thanks, Tom.
So continuing in Article 2, I'll make sure I'm on the right slide. So 2-3C5, the specific dates for the city messages, the state of the city message, we wanted before March 15th on an annual basis to ensure consistency and a constant period of time between them, or as constant as it can get. Section 2-6C, the rules of procedure, were changed to improve communication between council members and citizens, as well as provide more accountability of each council member, either district related or at large, and their constituents. 2-7A, yep, not skipping, right? No, I am. Rules of procedure stayed relatively the same for those other 2 city council members responsible for providing follow-up to citizens who comment. That was related to the 3-minute comment period that is allotted at the beginning of the town council meetings. And 2-6C15 was the statement requiring communication between councilors and constituents, again, working to make things more transparent and the councilors more accessible to their constituents. Section 2.7a, measures. We retained the original charter language to provide citizens and/or other aggrieved parties the opportunity to object to prior to enacting any changes. So originally, that if there was a change that was voted on and enacted, it would go into effect 72 hours later. We extended it to 30 days, which is quite the extension, with the goal of making it easier for constituents or, again, aggrieved parties to challenge the change. And then the last slide for Article 2, we'll start with Section 2.9. The newspaper legal notice postings are ineffective and extremely expensive, and so we replaced that with posting on the town website, posting requirements that are consistent with state law, and any other posting requirements as decided by the council, whether that be bulletin boards, whether that be town signage, at least 10 days prior to final passage of any change. And the last thing under Section 12, Article 2 is 12.2a, compensation of expenses. So this numerical value of $3,000 to provide a stipend to each counselor was the result of comparison to other city form of government in Massachusetts, as well as response to the citizens survey that Ed talked about earlier that happened in 2020. So we can move to Article 3, elected officials, starting with 3.1 in the general provisions. I'm not going to read through all individual bullets on this one. City employees, the big change here was allowing city employees to also serve on multi-member bodies of the city of Bridgewater and just establishing a provision that they weren't allowed to do so without obtaining prior approval from city council in consultation with the city attorney. This would enable employees that are also residents of the town to serve on non-council elected appointed positions with their annual approval. Section 3-2, the library trustees. We made significant amendments and clarifications to the roles and responsibility of the elected library trustees. This all stemmed from conversations and recommendations received directly from the trustees themselves, and it was designed to put power back in the hands of the elected trustees. Section 3-3, the recall provision. We first reduced the council at large voter requirement from 500 to 400, and we increased the number of voters to file from 100 to 400. And the difference there is that there was the previous charter than the Rules and Procedures Committee in 2017. We adopted the 2017 Town Council Rules and Procedures verbiage with minor grammatical changes outside of those numerical changes. In terms of Section 3-4, the city clerk, we after talking to the city clerk and looking at the responses to the citizen survey, agreed that the city clerk should remain elected. The city clerk specifically spoke to the group about the value of having an elected position versus an appointed position. Additionally, the feedback from the citizen survey was overwhelmingly in favor of keeping the city clerk as an elected position. Article 4, the town manager, starting with Section 4-1, the appointment qualifications and terms of office. The town councilor appointment of the manager to a maximum of 5-year renewable term, and the change that the city manager must serve at the will of the council is bound by whatever legislative action the council seeks to take. This recommendation reflects the feedback received from the citizen survey and the employee questionnaire that better checks and balances are needed between the city council and the city manager. We also added the appointment term consistent with other city appointed positions. Section 4-219, the change here was to better establish connection across the board for planning and maximizing success throughout the city of Bridgewater. This requires that the city council to develop a long-term goal for the city and make it clear and transparent to all employees and citizens. Section 4.225, we recommend that the change to promote the partnership by engaging in regular two-way effective communication. This is to make it easier for citizens' voices to be heard beyond, again, the 3 minutes that they have at the beginning of town council meetings. And finally, and also under Section 4-226, to conduct no less than quarterly information sessions with departments and communications organizations. I need to minimize this so I can actually see it. Communication-based organizations to promote continuous collaboration. This establishes a firm timeline for minimum communication between the town council, town manager, and civic organizations within the town. And 4-7, this was related to temporary absence and the timeline for the town manager. It's relatively self-explanatory, talking about the difference between less than 30 days, more than 30 days, and the notice and agreement with the town council. Go to the next one, Ed. Article 5, the most substantive change there was in section 5-3A, city attorney and the appointment. The city attorney, the legal officer, also known as the city attorney, will be appointed by the city council. This change is recommended because the city attorney represents the city as a whole and is representative of the citizens. This council majority gives direction on behalf of the city. Furthermore, this recommendation aligns with other city appointed positions that comes with a limited term and with the option for a reappointment at the end of the 5-year maximum term. Sweet. Article 6, financial management of the town. We're going to start with section 6-3C, the budget and actual assignments. The change there, this paragraph in 6-3C, this paragraph is contained within the current charter, the 2010 version. The 2014 Charter Review Committee updated it, but it was removed by the then 2017 Town Council Rules and Procedures Committee. We believe it is important to have a mid-year review on the budget to ensure transparency on the actual budget versus budgeted expenses. Section 6-6B3, we added a statement to list currently approved projects and their status. The idea is to separate the currently approved projects from the new projects and give all citizens their status. Section 6-8.1 through 2, we restored the content of the original charter, which gives the council responsibility for selecting an independent auditor. This change was to make the annual independent audit truly independent. We feel that by limiting the scope of their audit, it was limiting in nature. To that point, the direction given to the auditor needs to come from the city councilor, not the city manager. Go to Article 7, the elections and related matters. There were no non-grammatical changes there. I do see that there's a chat window, folks. We will address comments at the end, just to put that out there. In Article 8, citizen participation mechanisms, there were a few things that were changed there. The first was the city clerk will deliver a copy of the petition to the city attorney within 1 business day under section 8-1B, indicating the number of days provided clarity on the timeline and description of expectations of the city clerk. We increased the petition time from 10 to 30 days under section 8-2 to give citizens more time to initiate protest on a particular measure. And finally, we added email distribution to the reflective conventional types of communication. We're going to move to Article 9, general provisions, starting in 9-1A. This change was designed to make it easier, to make reading easier and more clear to understand what the conflicts of interest are. In section 9-6D, computation of time, this was added so there's no confusion about when the count begins by establishing the clause that the first day shall begin at 12 a.m. the day following the triggering event. Section 9-7, this was changed to eliminate confusion by breaking the removal process into 2 separate processes based on who the actual approving authority is, either the city manager or the city council. In Article 9, Section 9-9, the enforcement of charter provisions, this is relatively self-explanatory. It is the responsibility of all the elected officials in the town to ensure the enforcement and compliance with this charter and everything that goes along with it. So then we can move to Article 10. So transitional provision, section 10-1, timing and effect, removed non-applicable verbiage, and this charter shall become effective upon the ratification of the voters as provided by Massachusetts general law. Since not recommending to make the town clerk appointed verbiage, the exception is that provided in this section the provisions of this sections were no longer needed. And I think that is it for the articles themselves. So I believe I'm going to turn it back to Ed for the next slide.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. All right, that takes us to the following question, and that is, how can we ensure a successful rollout of these recommendations? There are two aspects to answering this question. The first is the packaging of the recommendations, and the second is the timing. As we all know, the previous process after leaving the Charter Review Committee took approximately 4 years before getting to the voters, from 2015 to 2019. And then once it got to the voters, it was basically packaged all or nothing. So it ultimately failed at the ballot box. So an alternative approach that we will present to the council includes having a series of questions on the ballot that give voters more choices without sacrificing the whole charter review. So one option is to bundle all of the non-contentious general recommendations into a single question. And so we've listed here some of those general items that could potentially be lumped into this bundle question. Could be changed, could be added to, whatever. This is just a stake in the ground. But then we'd have single questions for each of the more controversial items. So for example, we could have one question that would address the appointed versus the elected clerk. We could have another question that would talk about the term limits, the stipend, the recall provision, and so on. So there's basically no limit to the amount of questions you can have on the ballot, but obviously the more questions you have, the potential for more confusion exists. So there has to be some balance there in terms of how much choice you actually want to give the citizens. So using this approach will increase the likelihood of at least some of the recommendations passing at the ballot box. In terms of what happens next, we're holding these forums, reviewing our recommendations with the public and gathering final feedback, which will help us in the refinement process of our ultimate end product, which we hope to have completed actually by the end of this month. The last step will then be to package the recommendations and then present it to the council sometime in June. The council will then begin their process. And what they will do is they will review it internally. They will probably send it to their Rules and Procedures Committee. The town attorney will get involved in reviewing our recommendations for, past legal muster. And then they will ultimately decide what changes, if any, they want to make to our recommendations. Once they're done with it, then it goes to the state legislature for their review before coming back to the town for being placed on the ballot. So the question is, how long will that process take? It may take a year, maybe 2 years at the most, but I cannot envision it taking another 4 years like it did last time. If it does, there's something wrong. So anyways, that's kind of where we are right now. As Tom mentioned, there are a lot more details behind these, but obviously to go through every single detailed recommendation on a call like this would take hours. So we presented to you what we think are the key recommendations, and would be interested in taking now any questions or getting any feedback from any of the folks that have joined. So Kim, you're still on. So do you want to control or manage the questioning?
I can do it too, Ed, if she's busy.
Okay, so let me just
Okay, I
ask.
can. I'm on, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, so are there any comments or questions from anyone in attendance?
I would say that anybody that's making comments in the chat, please verbalize them so that it is recorded and we can address them. We're not allowed to address them in the chat.
Mark?
First of all, I want to commend you, Ed, and your committee for such a thorough and very good job. It's very understandable, and you've always taken feedback, and that's appreciated by myself as a citizen. Your presentation was very clear to understand. I went and looked at the whole document, which was on the website too, and I just have a couple of questions. Specifically 2.6C. Let me just find the wording over here. 2.6, right by it. Okay. Where it says 2.6C, it says should be posted on the website. I'm just suggesting it be stronger than that. Should be is kind of open to interpretation. It means you can do it or you cannot do it.
Okay.
That should. And then under citizen comment in 2.6C15, it talks about getting back to residents on citizens comment. I'm just wondering, the question that I've heard at a bunch of meetings like the past 4 months, 6 months, is when are you going to get back to us? And I know that it's hard in a charter to put down when that is, but is 2 weeks enough? Is a month enough? I mean, sometimes you never hear a response to anything. So just a thought on some kind of a reasonable timetable, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so one of the things that, obviously we struggle with when we're doing these recommendations is, should this recommendation or should this belong in the charter or should it go into the administrative code?
Mhm.
The charter is an overarching document that sort of provides a framework, and then the details below would play out into the administrative code. There's actually a section in the administrative code right now that talks specifically about feedback to citizens and how that is supposed to be managed. Unfortunately, nobody enforces it. So that enforcement is an issue. And but we're definitely trying to get some things into the charter that provide a little more teeth behind some of this stuff, Mark. So we will definitely go back and relook at that one in particular and see if we can make it a little stronger.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then on the articles dealing with the length of term for the town manager and the city attorney, my question is, if a conflict arose with the town manager, city manager, or the city attorney, and it's 5 years, let's say it happened at year 2, and the town wanted to remove the manager, do you owe the manager 3 years of salary? If there's a dispute, or the town attorney. I personally think where the counselors are a 3-year term, then maybe I wouldn't move it to 5, just personally. I just think it's a long time. I understand consistency. I'm not saying, it has nothing to do with the 2 people that are in the office right now, but I know in the past, before I moved here, there were problems with town managers before. So I just don't want the town to be on the hook for that longer period of time. And the reason I'm saying 3 is most of the boards and commissions are 3 years. I know you said it was compared to other towns, but I'm not a big fan of doing stuff that other towns do just because it's a comparison. I'm more in, what's going to be for the taxpayers. And I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm just putting that out there for thought.
Yeah. Okay. Good
Okay.
feedback. Obviously, the town manager, the city manager, and the attorney are also under contract. So what we're doing is we're providing sort of a high-end limit on the contract that says, you can sign a 5-year contract, but that's the longest you can go. And
Okay.
the process for removing the person, if you're not happy with the person, that is all spelled out in the contract as far as how that all works. But right now, there's nothing in the charter that talks about any sort of a term for either of those positions. They are appointed positions, so we're just trying to provide consistency with other appointed positions. But your points are well taken, Mark, and we will certainly go back and relook at whether 3 makes more sense than 5. Tom, go ahead.
I would say, Mark, can you just do me a quick favor and state your name and address for the record?
Oh, it's Mark Linde, Linde, and my address is 56 Michael Road. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, and my last thing is under the signature requirements to get elected. I noticed they didn't change at all. And I dealt with signature requirements myself the last election, and then I watched as people struggled this election with COVID and everything. I moved here from Brockton. Believe it or not, Brockton has a 50 signature requirement for mayor, councilors at large, and councilors. I think 150 is unnecessarily burdensome to townwide candidates, and my suggestion is to move it down to 100 and move the district councilor down to 50. Because it's a lot of, it was almost impossible last year during the start of COVID. And then this year, I know they all got together and did a signature party. They got half of their signatures, but they had a really hard time. The other option would be to allow for electronic signatures as well, which some communities did during the pandemic. So you're not out there knocking on people's doors that didn't want to even open the door to talk to you. And I know the COVID is only temporary, but we could have another situation. So just, that's it for me.
All right. Thank you so much for your attention and for your feedback. Appreciate it.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Okay.
Evan, I have a couple of questions related to what Mark said. So I'll start with the last one. My name's Fran Jeffries, and I'm at 35 Shaw Road. The signature thing, I've lived in many communities outside of Massachusetts. We never had to have signatures. You simply filed your papers and let the ballot box determine who got the votes. And it sorts itself out. Generally, people vote for people they know or people who've campaigned. So you got to spend your time where it really made a difference. Even without COVID, knocking on doors these days is not something people welcome in general. And so then you wind up, at the parking lot at Roche Brothers or trying to get to the transfer station, maybe not, we have our defaults. However, if you're new to town, you don't know that. And so again, I think as our community grows and changes, we need to be looking at that. I would certainly, if you're going to put a cap on it, I would go with 50. That's enough. It's a good faith effort. It gets you on the ballot and then let the sorting out happen. On the contract with the employees, I think your points are valid. It is a contract, but I would not go with less than 5 years because I think a qualified person is not going to take a job. If it looks like it's a 3-year contract, that seems like you barely get started. 5 is, in the life of a town manager and assistant town managers, short turnaround. When you're looking at a charter approval sometime in the next 4 years, you just got to line them up. So I would treat that separately as a personnel matter, and with it being under the contract and or administrative code. Mark, what was the first thing? There was some other, oh shoot. Well, whatever his first point was. Can't
On the
retain.
citizen comment, maybe?
Oh, the response to, yes, that's right, the response time. I do think referring specifically to the administrative code in the charter and saying that the details are there, but then as a follow-up, then getting some response, at least saying it will take us 2 weeks because we need to check with 2 more offices, or it will take us 2 months or whatever. But no response is not acceptable. There is a way to get response, and that is if you know someone and you can walk to see them, then people do get responses. But in general, again, looking at our community changing and growing, that's not a way to go forward. And we can't say it worked before, because I don't think it's going to work with larger numbers. We've got to have a way to keep people engaged, or we're going to find ourselves saying, why aren't people engaged?
Right.
And so one way they are is comment, whether we like those comments or not. So anyway, but thanks again very much for your good job excellent feedback, excellent reports to the community.
Thank you, Fran. Appreciate your feedback as well. Anyone else? David, good morning.
Good morning. David Moore, 54 Flag Street. I had sent it in on the chat. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring it up or discuss it or whatever, but my comments, as I had relayed this to you earlier, Ed, I feel as though the section on enforcement, when people step outside the regulations, I don't think this is something that should be done on a local level, only because we have a very, in my opinion, I've dealt with it personally on both sides of it, is the Ethics Commission regulations. Every town employee or appointed official has to go through ethics training. I believe it's every 2 years. So everybody's familiar with it. We're constantly being reminded of it. It's refreshed. And if you put it on a local level, in my opinion, it gets personal. And it gets people throwing rocks at each other, making accusations and so forth. If it's a very serious problem, it's something that the council president can address with our town council, our lawyer, or it can be just referred to the Ethics Commission. It's a very well-structured organization. They rotate on a regular basis. And on top of that, it also addresses the appearance of impropriety. And I think the town regulations only discuss doing something wrong, breaking the law or violating the charter in some way. I think the appearance of impropriety is also very important. And this is something that the Ethics Commission deals with. It's also something that if the Ethics Commission finds that, yes, there is a serious violation of a state regulation or local law or whatever, and they can turn it over to the Attorney General's office for prosecution. So it's something that has teeth, a lot of teeth, and it's something that the council doesn't have that stronger enforcement. And just gets, I don't know, but that's just my opinion on the subject.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Joe?
Yes, yeah, I would. Joseph Gillis, 30 Town Line Circle, Bridgewater, Mass. Thank you. I've enjoyed watching the presentation and the various high-level synopsis provided. I concur and like the idea of your packaging into the non-controversial items, a lot of the bookkeeping, housekeeping types of things that should probably just get taken care of and probably limited opposition to, and then separating out controversial. One that I may, suggest pondering is, just in the short meeting, there's been a lot of conversation about the town manager and rules around the town manager. So I'm wondering whether or not you may have a fifth bucket there under controversial for town manager items. And maybe my last comment, and I know that Mark and Fran both mentioned this about signatures, that I think this past election, I'm not sure whether, no one was officially on the ballot for the library, and all of the town council positions were, I think, unopposed. I don't know whether that's because people had difficulty getting to those signature thresholds, but I would be in favor of dropping them significantly. And if I just did my math correct, I think I took a look and, like, say the state of Massachusetts, to get on to be a president of the United States, the state requires 10,000 signatures out of like 4.7 million people. If Bridgewater had that same ratio, we would only require 33 signatures to get on a townwide ballot or a townwide election position. So I'd probably be more in favor of getting to, where others were talking about, maybe even with the minimal that you have 10 signatures, especially when it's just your precinct, when you're limited to 1/7 of the town. If you get 10 signatures, to be on the ballot, then let the voters decide. But by having somebody on the ballot, it at least allows for a vetting of the positions. And I know it was difficult this time around with COVID, but I know that there was one group that put on, a citizens symposium to find out about the candidates, and you can at least find out about people that Mark, you spoke earlier, Mark and Fran, if you want to run for something, at least people can talk about, oh, Mark and Fran, and what do they want to do because they're running for something. People are just running and doing complete write-ins. You have no idea about anything, and there is no vetting process. So, maybe that's another item that may be controversial where you want the number to be, but I would push more for it to be, 10, that if you can find 10 people that meet the criteria, whether it be townwide or in your precinct, that's past the bar to be able to get people on. Because I do think there's value in having announced candidates that there's at least a little bit of a vetting process to know that, 3 people were elected to the library. I, don't know. I'm not sure if I know who any of them are, but I don't know anything about them or why they wanted to be on the library. It was just, there was no vetting process. So that's my take, and thank you for the presentation so far.
All right. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate your feedback. Good. Anyone else would like to speak? I do want to mention to you that obviously once we deliver our final recommendations to the council, it's pretty much out of our hands. So if you feel strongly enough about a particular item, like it, dropping the number of our voting requirements, make sure you send that same message to the council once they start discussing it. Because that's what's going to happen is their Rules and Procedures Committee is basically going to thumbs up or thumbs down, and then they'll have their rationale for why, and we need to still send the message to them to keep stuff. All right, well, I don't see anyone else that wants to speak. So, Tom, you want to add something?
I just want to say, if anyone is interested, we do meet every first and third Wednesday of the month. As we start to wrap up, we are going to, as an entire committee, re-vote on everything we voted on thus far over the last year. So if you are available on either of those days, feel free to watch. And I do think that based on some of the feedback today and other feedback we've received, things may change from the first time we voted on them last October. So just throwing that out there as an offer to everyone. You also know how to reach out to us. So if you do have questions or follow up, please just let us know.
Great. Thanks, Tom. All right. Well, thank you all for joining and for your time on a beautiful Tuesday morning. And our next session is going to be Thursday night, this Thursday at 7 p.m. If you want to join again, great. And then our final session is Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So thanks again. Thank you, Fran. Appreciate that. Have a great day, everybody. And thanks,
Thank you,
Kim.
everybody.
Thanks, Kim, for helping us out.
Most welcome. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.